This is the CHGO Cubs Podcast. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan, and we are coming to you on Sunday, September 8th. Brendan, and, I don't know. I think safe to say that this discussion of the Chicago Cubs is the most important thing happening in the city of Chicago.
Nothing else going on. No one debuting. We have a ton to talk about the September playoff-bound Cubs, Corey.
Right. So we will talk about that. We will talk about the week that was, Cubs dropping series to the Pirates and the Yankees. So certainly not as we drew things up. We will talk about Anthony Rizzo's return to Wrigley Field, the Ovations, how that all felt, etc. If we have time, we'll touch on the Cubs Hall of Fame inductions of Aramis Ramirez and Kerry Wood, two players obviously central to Brendan and I's fandom. I know, Cody's as well. We're right in that age range.
And if we don't, guys, they'll touch on it tomorrow. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Make that clear.
But the week that was, dropping both these series, Rizzo, we may not have time to get to that. Yeah. So plenty to talk about. It was not a good week. But we'll start, and just throwing it out there. Big shout out to our CHGO Bears crew. Tailgate this morning. I think they did 1,000 shows today. Pre-game, like 3 post-game shows. We have literally Lance Briggs and Alex Brown debuting on CHGO this afternoon. So a big afternoon for CHGO. Unfortunately, this is one of those times, Brendan, I think when we first joined CHGO and started it and all those initial conversations, you kind of envision this being a day where it's like Caleb Williams is debuting, former Bears legends joining the podcast network and doing the post game, and the Cubs are locking up the NL Central. It should be this magical September Sunday, and the Cubs just not doing their part.
Well, we don't deserve all that good,
No, that's true.
That we just don't deserve it. Maybe in the future you do more good deeds, we become good Samaritans, and then we deserve everything aligning at one time.
Yeah, I told our guy Greg Braggs, when we dealt with that very serious incident in Milwaukee at our takeover, as anyone following CHGO knows, he had to get some surgery. His legs are messed up. I told him, I was like, the universe could not allow it to be this easy for the Bears to be good and have a big quarterback, and you're going to have to suffer a little bit. So I think now, that's kind of on us. But did want to give a big shout out to them. They've been doing a ton of work, big day. And so if you are a Bears fan and somehow have not come across CHGO's Bears coverage, I would invite you to change that. It's taken to a whole new level today, but they do really great work over there. Transitioning, Brendan, we'll talk about the week that was. Obviously, it's a very disappointing week, but it did feel very in line for the 2024 Chicago Cubs. Brendan, they clawed their way. They played out of their minds for a month and a half. They got it to 3 games. They're right on the heels of the Mets, and then by proxy, the heels of the Atlanta Braves, and they just lay an absolute egg at beautiful, historic Wrigley Field. They drop 2 of 3 to the Pittsburgh Pirates. They drop 2 of 3 to the New York Yankees, scoring 0 runs in the first 2 games of that series. And I don't know that everybody had been pulled back in, Brendan, but
shut up. You were pulled back in a little bit.
For myself, I'm speaking for everybody else.
Okay.
And,
But you were pulled back in a little bit. We all were.
Listen, 3 games.
You were
3 games.
5 outs away from being 2.5 back.
Yeah.
In the first week of September.
Yeah.
Where you're playing in the margins of crazy stuff happening.
Yeah.
This week sucked. it was extreme on the other form, getting shut out multiple times.
Yeah,
What is it? 3 times they got shut out this week? It's
I
just
think that's right.
absurd. You
Yeah,
go in multiple, 15 plus innings without scoring a run. It's unfortunate. It's hard to be upset about because we've been used to seeing these highs and lows this season, but it defines this roller coaster season where we
yeah.
have some good, but the bad overwhelms the good for now, at least. Unless the season gets crazy once again.
Yeah. So appreciate if you are joining in our YouTube chat. We're expecting a lighter crowd.
We have a robust YouTube chat today.
But if you're listening on our podcast app on Monday morning or later Sunday night, hello, welcome to our YouTube chat. Have our friend Rogue Wave Creative in the YouTube chat asking, is it live? It is. This is live.
We're doing it
Yeah,
live.
I mean, I don't know what to say. You know, when the Cubs were going on that stretch, and we talked about it last week, you know, where they scored, what was it, 99 runs in
99
game.
games.
You
Yeah.
knew that would level out. Of course, that was not going to continue. But it certainly hoped that kind of that this week looked a lot like an earlier season version of this team, where the starting pitching is really good. The starting pitching is doing their best to keep you in these games, and you just can't score any runs.
I'm so sick of talking about this team.
I know.
I am. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like I'm exhausted doing this. Like
This coming into this week, this felt like the bigger picture version of a fake rally where they load the bases in the ninth inning
I
and don't
mean,
score, like getting within 3. And I think they were only 2 back of the Mets.
yeah,
Like you're right there. Whether you believed in this team or not doesn't matter. Like 3 back with only a couple teams in front of you. It's still a tough road. But man, I mean, we were looking at this week, Brendan, thinking like, I hate to say you kind of have to sweep the Pirates, but you might have to sweep the Pirates, and you got to find a way to win 2 against
yeah.
New York and then survive this 3-game trip out west against the Dodgers. And losing 2 to the Pirates and then 2 to the Yankees, like that just was not really one of the acceptable options. So obviously they're not mathematically out of it, but you are, yeah, this has gotten much. It was already like a 4% chance, and this week
Yeah.
has made that much
You
worse.
didn't even mention the Justin Steele injury. That's how bad of a week it
Right.
was.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, we went from the highest of highs over that week stretch on last Sunday show. You could not draw up a worse week for this team, offensively and injury wise, and a lot of the good performances we saw
Yeah.
just didn't persist this week.
Yeah. And so we do have a question in the YouTube chat that I think is a fair one, and because we're starting on the generalities, and then we'll talk about Anthony Rizzo. Of course, we're going to spend a decent amount of time on Anthony Rizzo. But a question from Rogue Wave Creative asking, you know, sort of generally, like what causes it to be such a roller coaster? Sometimes this team looks so good, and sometimes just so bad. I think that's going to be a pretty nuanced answer, but like my short answer is that's what you get when you know, this is why we didn't want a low 80s projected team. And
Yeah.
I don't, it's not always about the projections and what the computers think and whether they're accurate or whatever, but they spit out that projection for a reason. And when you're in those low 80s, it means you don't have those surefire things that take you to that next level. And I hate to always like bang the drum for the same examples, but you know, you think of guys like in the Yankees, for example, guys like Aaron Judge or Juan Soto, who has a, you know, 1,050 OPS
Oh,
with
that's it.
almost 40 home runs. Cubs don't have those guys. And you need those guys who from the season start to the season end, they are just those star level players. And that's not the only difference in a team like being inconsistent. But when you look at this team, like to me, that's the thing that jumps out. You have some hitters like Ian Happ or even Dansby, who's been great for the last like month plus. But those inconsistencies throughout the year, this is what that looks like. And so sometimes this team is going to look like they can't possibly score any runs, even if you or I were pitching, Brendan. And then other times they look like they're, you know, that 2 weeks ago stretch where it's like, oh, they're just going to put up 10 runs again. Like, you know, here come the Cubs with another crooked number. So I think the inconsistency is who they are and kind of who they were always going to be. And that's why the projections put them where they did.
Do you ever play skee ball? You know that game?
Yeah.
Yeah. You throw kind of like bowling, you throw the ball and you try to get the ball in those like little spheres,
Yeah.
right? So there's some randomness involved in that. You try to get into the goal sphere. In baseball terms, for projections, some of those spheres are larger and some of them are smaller. The sphere you want to get that ball in is 95 plus wins. For teams like the Yankees, Dodgers, Braves going into the year, that sphere is larger. For the Cubs, you have a bunch of medium sized spheres. So it's unsurprising they roll into 85 wins.
Yeah.
It's also kind of unsurprising, quite frankly, to roll into 90 wins.
Yeah.
It's also unsurprising to roll into 75 wins. And
Well,
that's marked by the track record of guys they've had. They've had track records of inconsistency, and it's represented, to your point, in those projections.
yeah. And I think a good example, as we welcome back 2016 World Series champion Anthony Rizzo with
For
the
which
Chicago
team?
Cubs. He won it with the Cubs.
Cubs.
Yep. I knew you
Okay.
were going to ask. I came
Just
prepared this
making
time. I
sure.
looked it up.
Okay.
You compare that to like the 2016 Cubs, and I'm not looking at the stats for that
World
team in
Series
front of me. I'm
championships.
speaking
Yeah.
anecdotally, but like we all remember that stretch before the All-Star break where they looked like a totally different
Awful.
team. Like
Yeah.
the reason I bring that up is because that team looked like the same group for, I don't know, call it 140 out of the 180 or so days in the season. Small blip where they were like, yeah, any team, no matter how good, they're going to have periods where they get shut out. They have offensive droughts. The players they're in big slumps, whatever. The pitching, it seems no matter what bullpen call, it's never the right one. But when you're a really good team, like on the 2016 Cubs, that stretch was minuscule. On this team, it happens every other week. And that's just how they were constructed. And so through the rest of this season, I'm sure we'll have other periods where it's like, oh man, look at these guys again. Now they're scoring 8 runs a game. They're hitting all these homers, whatever. And then you have weeks like this one where it's like, does not matter who's pitching, does not matter what's going on. It seems like they just can't score any runs. So
yeah, I think it's a fair point to recognize the 2016 context, which they won the World Series.
yes,
But it was a bridge from 2015. And don't get it twisted, but they didn't necessarily push all their chips in on 2016. Financially, they actually went over the tax more in subsequent years. It wasn't an all-in year until the trade deadline when they traded for Aroldis Chapman. Going into the year, and this puts into context, they were a 92 win team on paper by PECOTA, which is more or less the relative gold standard for projections today. So 92 wins going into the year. If you were to tell me that for 2025, I'd be like, not enough, not enough. And the 2016 Cubs hit some of that positive variance.
yeah,
And then that positive variance ended up persisting in 2017, 2018, 2019, when those projections then became larger because guys like Rizzo and Schwarber and Bryant, they had that track record to go with it, in addition to Kyle Hendricks cementing himself and John Lester negating the presumed aging curve that he was shown to possibly have.
yep.
So it's 2016 was never like an obvious, they're just going to win 100 games. Of course, we had the hype and it felt like very optimistic in 2015, but it really wasn't like that going into the year from the computer perspective. That is.
So I think hopefully that answers the question. And I actually like that question because it is a good, I think, way to frame even just this week, coming off a stretch where they played really good baseball, looked like even though there's not much time left in this season, they're kind of close. If they can just keep rolling somehow,
and this
maybe.
was always the fear.
And then it's,
this is what we talked about in the last offseason. I hate watching baseball like this. You and I talked exactly like this. There's going to be times where they trick you, where they look like, they're making that next step. And then, of course, because this is how they're projected in their track records, it's likely you see these roller coasters persist.
And you just need those like super consistent top level players because they balance it all out.
They're
weeks where Dansby is struggling or Happ is struggling, you need those players that it's not that they never struggle, but they'll keep you afloat most of the time, and you can kind of deal with the rest of the roster ebbing and flowing so much. Unfortunately, on this team, it's too much ebb and flow. There's just not enough of that like top level consistency, which I feel like we've been saying it for.
And I'll do the ad break here in 5 seconds, but 2016, you signed Jason Hayward, did not live up to expectations offensively. They signed Jason Hayward as a way to offset the risk with Chris Bryant and the young guys. Ironically, it was Chris Bryant and Rizzo who offset that risk. So that's hopefully what they can get going forward, whether it be through free agency or acquisitions elsewhere.
Yeah.
Do the ad break here.
We're going to do the ad break here. And then when we come back, we are going to talk about Anthony Rizzo.
With Empire today, you get shop at home convenience, the right product for your needs, quick and easy professional installation, and a low price guarantee. Empire today is the best place to get new flooring. So, of course, they have copycats, but Empire cannot be beaten on quality, service, speed. So competitors advertise low quality products that Empire simply will not carry. Empire won't promise the lowest prices because anyone who does is simply putting flooring in your home they would not put in theirs. Their virtual floor designer is a great way to see how new floors will look in any space. It's easy. Just snap a picture and instantly see how new floors will look in your own room. They service their own warranties. If an issue arises, just call Empire. They service all warranties themselves. You won't have to track down a manufacturer's phone number ever. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can get a $350 off discount when they use promo code CHGO. Restrictions do apply. See empiretoday.com/CHGO for details. Whenever I want tickets, Corey, let's say I want to go to one of these Bears games. Maybe I want to torture myself and go to a Cubs game lately. I use Game Time. It makes finding the best seats so easy, whether it's for concerts, sports shows. I love that I can see real-time updates and grab tickets at the best price right from my phone. I'm not a big crowds guy. I don't like the lines. I don't like the hassle. Game Time is just quick and easy booking, plus no hidden fees. I know exactly what I'm paying for. It's my go-to for any event. If you haven't tried it yet, download Game Time. Maybe catch a Cubs game as the season winds down here and try for yourself. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Guess what? Use code CHGO for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and use code CHGO for $20 off.
All right, Brendan, back with you. So setting the scene a little bit, the Braves win on Sunday. The Mets lose on Sunday. The Cubs win on Sunday. So the Cubs sit 5 games out of
There's
final wild card spot.
There's still a chance.
Effectively 6. You guys remember the tiebreakers. We've warned you about the tiebreakers.
How funny would it be if they come back next Sunday and we're 2 games back? I mean, you wouldn't even be surprised at this point.
I would, because they have 3 games in LA, but otherwise
is that this week?
That's tomorrow.
Yeah. God, man.
So that's really the trick. Even if you're looking and saying, okay, they got a bunch of games against the Athletics, the Nationals, etc., you still have 3 in LA against the Dodgers and 3 in Philadelphia.
Nice.
So I don't even know what is a
so just sweep both those teams.
That. Yeah,
it's not that hard.
So,
it's only 3 games.
Crazier things have happened, but this week really not a final nail in the Cubs coffin, but to put simply, you just couldn't afford losing both of these series. Like, you were looking at of course, the Yankees are a really good team coming into Wrigley Field. You can kind of budget, okay, like understood, like these are hard teams. That Dodgers series is going to be hard. Can't drop 2 or 3 at home to Pittsburgh and expect when you're that far behind other teams, you can't wait for them to do that work for you. You have to clean up on those. So
it is what it
we'll see what happens, and we'll come back to this conversation in the latter half of the podcast. But I do want to talk about Anthony Rizzo. Friday, of course, the first time that Anthony Rizzo has taken the field at beautiful historic Wrigley Field since he was traded at the 2021 deadline. And, Brendan, I was there for Chris Bryant.
I wanted to ask you about this. So let me set the stage, because you're the one who actually experienced it.
Sure.
So you've been to every one of these reunions.
I was not at Javi's.
You were not at Javi's.
I was not.
You were at Chris Bryant's though.
Yes.
So I want to paint you a picture. Okay. Sure. So I'm at work and I'm seeing this from my TV, okay? Watching the game in the background. Of course, I want to catch Rizzo coming back to Wrigley. I want to see what the ovation's like. I texted you. I'm like, was that up to standards with Rizzo? My expectation with these ovations is like blowing Rizzo away, tears, etc., etc. And you said, "Oh, yeah, it was like exactly what he deserved, and it was like the
Yeah.
ultimate way to welcome him back."
Yeah.
That gave me a lot of ease, and I was glad to
Yeah.
see everything transpire the way it did.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of those things where you wish that this was all like a rock concert and he could just stand there for 20 minutes. And if people just keep cheering, he just keeps standing there.
Like Eddie Vedder, Pearl Jam at Wrigley
Yes,
Field.
that
So
is what
there you go.
that is what I was hoping for. But yeah, it's, unfortunately you have to deal with the pitch clock when took the field for the first ovation when they played the tribute video. He walks off the field, he starts going a stretch, like they got to get the game going,
So
So
the tribute video was before he was stretching or after he was stretching? When was the tribute video?
so he was in the dugout. The tribute
Yeah,
video airs about 10 minutes
yeah,
before first pitch. He
yeah.
watches it, says thanks, then goes to his family. Then he ran out to the bleachers. The bleachers gave him another
Oh,
ovation. I don't know if that was on
I didn't
TV or
I didn't
not.
see that.
There's photos that I saw circulating on Twitter of
To
him, like,
go
bending
stretch
down,
or
like,
just to,
kneeling
like
down.
just to go stretch or just to go say hi?
Well, he was just going to stretch, but he
Okay.
did wave to the
Went to the
bleachers and
bleachers.
yeah,
Got
and
it.
they,
Yeah.
everybody was standing. I think it was what he deserved. Like I said, like when he steps in the box, they're doing the pitch clock. Like they
Dude,
they
I was
they,
so
they gotta
pissed
go.
off.
Like,
I'm
yeah.
watching the
So
game. I see him step in the box I see 15 behind him. I'm like, "What the
yeah,
hell are these umpires doing?
yeah.
These damn umpires gotta let this go."
And yeah, so I think I thought it was great. And what I especially loved, and I give my fellow Cubs, I was only able to go on Friday. And I give my fellow Wrigley faithful a lot of credit for giving him a standing ovation first at bat, 3 straight games.
Mm.
I thought that was a very clear, like, we are gonna do this every day, and you can tell, like, Rizzo, he's emotional, and I think after the first, he's like, all right," like,
Yeah,
"Okay."
done. Let me do this.
But they kept doing it, and I really appreciated that, and, when they read his name on Friday, everybody cheered, people started standing up then, of course, for the tribute video, the first ovation, first at bat, I thought it was great, and,
Yeah.
um
I mean, that picture from Scotty that he has of Rizzo,
yeah, from Marquee.
oh
Yeah,
my
just incredible.
gosh. That's, I mean, one of the best pictures you can possibly get.
Yeah, so I thought it was a very, befitting celebration, but as I tweeted, I mean, I think, people can have the guys from 2016 and that era, everybody's gonna have their favorites and
Which
maybe
era?
hold them 2016 when they won the World Series.
Okay, just making sure.
Everyone's gonna hold certain guy, John Lester's my favorite player, like, everybody's gonna have different sort of ways of feeling about that, um, but I think Anthony was always the guy, and I tweeted something to the same effect where it was like, there is I can't contain it all even in my enough characters on Twitter. Uh he was just that guy. He was the de facto captain. He played here for a decade in the system and on the Cubs team. He was the face of all of that, and he was just that guy. And so to explain what he means to this organization, the fans, the city of Chicago, in terms of being that guy on the team that finally won the World Series for the Chicago Cubs, it's difficult, I think, to properly state what Anthony Rizzo means to all of that. And it's impossible to give him like a proper expression of like our gratitude, I think. But I always say this, and I said this when like Lester came back and KD and Javi and all these guys. My only hope is that Rizzo feels and knows how much he means to
I
this
think he
city
does.
and this fan base. I think he does too.
Yeah.
Uh,
I know
but
Chris Bryant does.
yeah, and so I hope that that's what he felt this weekend because it's what he deserves. I mean, The KB one too was also different. You know, that was that same season. So that was like
Yeah.
still fresh
I mean, he's crying in the
and
batter's box.
weird. Yeah. And so this was years in the making. And yeah, I thought it was great. It was a very that Friday was a weird day in the
It was
stands. It was
weird.
very emotional. You know, when he was coming up, they start playing Intoxicated. You hear that beat, and you're like, man, it does take you back. I mean, just
Yeah, it brings you back.
sitting in the same
You
seats.
got
I
Kyle Hendricks banging
yeah,
on the railings. It's like, man, it's crazy how fast time goes
watched him.
by.
Watched him
For
walk up
real.
to this song and in such consequential moments of our
Man.
fandom, and to hear it and see it, it was yeah, it was dusty in Wrigley Field on Friday. I will
For
say
for
that.
for me, what I'm looking forward to the most as we get older, as fans get older, is how the legend of Rizzo is communicated. I'm talking, 20 years from now. The comparison naturally is Ron Santo and the legend of Ron Santo. The comparison specifically being the relatability, Ron Santo's relatability as a player who genuinely loved his environment, the
Yeah,
Cubs, and baseball. And you saw that percolate through Rizzo in every moment he played the game for the Cubs. So I'm curious when you and I are 60 years old, I have gray hair like crazy, what people who are our age now perceive Rizzo as.
yeah,
Because I do think he will be viewed in a similar light as someone like Ron Santo. And
yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing that
I
because
think so. Yeah,
he deserves that, but also it's such an advantage from the Cubs organizational perspective to have a figure like that with that legend status. And then it makes you think, man, maybe they should have just never traded him. And man, Kevin Alcantara better
yeah,
pan out, which is a different
yeah,
conversation. But that's what I'm looking forward to because that was the first memory that crossed my mind. Um, is seeing 2012, 2013 when he was coming on over and getting through the system and all the emotion. And then my mind went to me as like an 8-year-old, like getting the autograph from Ron Santo. The only reason I did that was because my grandpa told me, "Oh, this guy is
right,
the Cub guy." I'm
right.
like, "Oh
Yeah,
my God, I got to go get this guy's autograph." So
yeah,
that's where I think Rizzo could fill that space in future years.
yeah. I mean, again, it's tough to really put into words. I mean, I was glad to, like I said, my only hope is that he feels that and he knows
Oh, come
that.
on. Of course he does.
I'm sure, but you just never know. Like you know, you just never know. And I was glad that we had the opportunity to do that. It
Yeah.
feels weird watching him and seeing him, you know, on the left field scoreboard with a different uniform on and like a Cubs pitcher to his right. It feels very weird. But at the same time, like when those guys were traded, you know, they didn't play that day. Like
You
that
know what
whole
that entire afternoon
fiasco.
was like? You ever seen, the ending of, Goodfellas, where everyone's just kinda like, uh, uh,
Yeah.
whacked,
Yeah.
basically?
Right.
That's what it felt like. Javi's
So,
gone.
you know,
Rizzo's gone.
we didn't have that opportunity, and so it felt like important to me as a fan to be there on Friday and to give him that applause, like, and just make sure that I was one of the people. Everyone was standing, but to just make sure that that place was full of people standing. And you know, like I texted you, like that was a 120 game, and like every 120 game is not full by the time the game starts. It
Mhm.
gets there usually because it's a Cubs game and it's Friday, but like it's still the
So,
workday for most
everyone
people.
knew,
It was
like
full.
yeah.
People were there to cheer for Anthony Rizzo. There were a ton of Anthony Rizzo jerseys. People were there to give him his flowers, and I was glad to be a part of that. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what more you can really say. I think he, again,
They should sign him again.
he is not the he's not the sole reason they win the World Series. He's not even the best player on that team. You know, really, by the time from 2015 on, he's not the best player on any of those teams, really. But he's just the guy, and he was the guy that was there before they got good and rode some of that out with us, and whose development, if it doesn't happen, a lot of that probably doesn't happen. Like
No,
him
does not
turning into
happen.
the guy that he was, and that trade for Andrew Kashner working the way that it did is the catalyst that allows the rest of it to fall in and work within the framework.
And they should give Eric Hinsky a standing ovation too, because Eric Hinsky is the one who inspired Rizzo crowding the plate that took away the outer third and propelled Rizzo into the stardom we saw.
Yeah. And, you know, you think of all of those moments. I mean, you know, famously going after the Reds dugout and Aroldis Chapman. And they showed it during the tribute video, and they mentioned it a lot, but like his work in the community in Chicago, like this is a guy who lived and breathed being a Chicago Cub and making a positive impact on the city of Chicago and the people that support this team and support him and everything. And yeah, I don't know, man. It's tough to put into words. More than anyone, you know, you guys, anybody that's listened to us or, you know, follows me on Twitter or knows me, like I'm a John Lester man. I love John Lester.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Okay.
But
where's your jersey? I don't see it.
He's not that guy. It's over there. Yeah. He wasn't that guy. Ben Zobrist wasn't that guy. Chris Bryant wasn't that guy. Javi, for as electric as he was, and, you know, El Mago Mania, he wasn't that guy. The guy
was Jason Hayward.
Yeah. It was Anthony Rizzo. It was Anthony Vincent Rizzo. It always was. You know, I know there was
one who got away.
He was never actually the captain, but we all knew that he was. You know, he was that guy. He was the face. He was. If we have a version of Mr. Cub from our lifetime,
it's him.
It's Anthony Rizzo. And I know he's playing for a different team now, and I'm sure he's enjoying his time in New York. It's an obviously very good fit for him.
I'm hoping he's enjoying it, but not too much.
Yeah, but it was an emotional time, but I'm glad he got that, and I'm glad we got the chance to celebrate him and give him several standing ovations. And it would never be enough. I hope that if he continues playing and continues coming back to Wrigley Field, if it is a visiting player, he gets that reception every time, because we waited a lifetime for that championship. People older than us waited much longer of a lifetime, and plenty of people waited their whole lives and didn't get it. And Anthony Rizzo was the guy on the team that brought it to us. And I think you will be forever grateful. All Cub fans should be forever grateful to Anthony Rizzo. He should never buy a drink in this city ever again. And like I said, after that weekend, I just hope that he feels that on his end. It's especially in Chicago, man. Like it's I'm sure it's difficult for athletes, I would imagine, to even like understand the level of like reverence an entire city can have for you, and like the esteem that they can hold you in. But like when you do it in Chicago and you're that guy, like it's a level of like sports celebrity that a lot of people don't really aspire to. And like a genuine,
this is the best
like
sports city in the world.
Yeah.
It's not even close.
Yeah.
No offense to anyone else, but just saying.
So before we hit our second ad break here, a couple comments I want to read through. Firstly, from Dave Lacroix. He says, pretty sure if Rizzo hit a home run, he would have gotten a curtain call. He definitely would have, and that would have been bad for the Cubs. But they weren't scoring runs those first 2 days anyway, so whatever. Yeah. And that would have been pretty cool. Also, shout out Dave. I saw Dave walking through the neighborhood here in Lakeview.
Did he ask about me?
He did. He said,
he
hi.
Did? All right, Dave.
He did. He said,
you're on my good list.
Said he's been going to the 120 Club with Cody, hanging out. But always appreciate that. It's very nice to feel that support and have people say hi in person. Still surreal when it happens, but very cool. So appreciated that, Dave. And then to ZJ in our YouTube chat says, Caleb had a typical tough rookie debut, still light years ahead of Daniel Jones. LOL. Appreciate it, ZJ. I believe there is another show live on the CHGO Sports YouTube channel that you may want to hop in.
I mean, I know like I'm as buff as Lance Briggs.
Yeah, I am not Lance Briggs. But appreciate it. Yeah. So we're not here to.
I get confused for athletes all the time. That's my problem.
Yeah. I literally think there's like 6 hours of Caleb Williams and Bears discussion on the CHGO Sports YouTube page. So I would direct
Nice.
you there. Those guys are the best in the business. We'll see if we have more to say on Rizzo. It's one of those things, Brendan, where I genuinely, and that's what I mean. You can't state it enough. Like, we could do hours of podcasts on his career, his time as a Cub, what he means to all of this. It's tough to contain it to a single conversation, but
Yeah.
that's how important he is, and I think will be forever to the Chicago Cubs organization. So we're going to take our second ad break here, and then we'll come back, and I don't know, we'll talk about anything else going on with the Chicago Cubs.
Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. If you want to bet, for example, Caleb Williams passing yards, well, you can bet you get one win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right, only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss the deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. I also made my first $10 deposit and received an instant $10 bonus. If you have the skills, you can play for a shot at turning your $10 into $1,000. Download the Prize Picks app and use code CHGO to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CHGO on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Penrose Brewing, Geneva, Illinois, Seltzup, hard seltzers with real fruit, led by Lemon Seltzup, a national gold medal winning hard seltzer with real lemons. They created our unique twist on a lemon shake-up with a house-made hard seltzer and pureed lemons for a throwback to warm weather and county fairs. Also available is Lemon Tea Up, a half and half inspired hard seltzer. And just released this year is Transfusion Seltzup, inspired by a popular golf cocktail with grape, ginger, and lime. Penrose is available at your local beverage retailer, or you can visit Penrose's tap room in Geneva. For more information, go to penrosebrewing.com or follow them on social media at Penrose Brewing.
All right, Brendan. So back with you here, talking Chicago Cubs and things of the sort. I think if we're getting back into the week that was, I mean, certainly that series with Pittsburgh, it just can't happen. It's one of those things we talk a lot where it's like you can't make demands in professional sports and like in the game of baseball. The Pirates are not horrendous this year. We've certainly seen worse versions of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Pitching is good, et cetera, et cetera. But like with your season on the line at home, after you just like blew the doors off them in some of those games in Pittsburgh, you can't come home and lose those first 2 games, dude. It just can't happen. And of course, you know, in one of those games, you know, in those games you had like Jorge Lopez finally faltering and stuff like, and we talked about that. That was one of the things you and I talked about last Sunday was like, okay, these guys have like been unreal and they've kind of carved out their roles in the bullpen. Can it last though? And like, you know, very quickly, it was like, no, these guys can't be perfect. Like they've been unreal and kind of bailed you out a little bit, but that series can't happen. But what I think was like the real, like kind of like gut punch, other than, you know, watching our version of Mr. Cub wearing a Yankees jersey at Wrigley Field. The real gut punch, Brendan, was like, you look at these games and like Jordan Wicks on Friday and then Javier Assad on Saturday, like in a series where you're playing the Yankees, you're welcoming Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, Juan Soto to Wrigley Field. If you told me going into that series that the Cubs pitching the first 2 games, obviously the Cubs win on Sunday 2-1. But if you told me that they were going to hold the Yankees to 6 runs in the whole series, 5 in the first 2 games, I would have been like, man, they pulled it off. Like they pulled off the series they needed to have against the Yankees. No runs, that hurts, Brendan. For as much as we were like a little back in on the chance of this team pulling it off, the pitching staff did what they could against a really talented Yankees lineup, and you couldn't give them anything,
Isn't
Brendan.
it sort of funny in a dark way? The pressing topic was, should Kyle Hendricks or Javi Assad be in the rotation? That was like the
Yeah,
question going into Monday. Now the question is, all right, when does the season end again? Like
yeah.
that's what we're back to looking at. It's unfortunate how baseball turns on a dime like this. I'm zoning in on Michael Busch and Isaac Paredes. It's been bad for Isaac, like cringefully bad watching him play for the Cubs right now because you know he wants to succeed
Sure.
in a new organization, especially the one who originally signed him. And he's been one of the worst players in professional baseball since coming over to the Cubs from Tampa Bay, batting 162, 3 home runs, a 66 WRC plus, and minus -0.3 wins above replacement.
Went
This
brutal
is
on defense.
brutal on
Yeah.
defense, making errors that, he's made some good plays that maybe Morel would not have made, but just not the consistent guy that we assumed the Cubs would be getting. Of course, the question then becomes, well, is this the new normal? Is this a slump? Is it random? What do we make of this? Can they even count on him for third base for 2025? And quite frankly, it's kind of a legitimate question. I know he's been a top producer over the past 2 years, but he did it in a unique way that most guys don't produce, in a way that Tampa Bay selectively used matchups for him. I think those are fair questions. However, I don't think it's been as bad recently as it looks. So I do think there's room for encouragement if you want to look at some of the process he's been showing. So quickly before I throw it back to you, I'm always again zooming in on Michael Busch and Paredes, the corners. That way we can maybe improve elsewhere in the offseason. So the plot I'm showing here puts both those guys in the same picture. Red is Michael Busch's expected WOBA over the course of the season. Blue is Isak's. Now, what you'll see is that Isak's expected weighted on base average was below 300 towards the back end of July. However, within the last 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, it's actually gone up to around 400. Now it's gone back down to around 370 within his last 25 balls in play. So the quality of batted balls has improved for Isak in the past few weeks. And similarly, despite Michael Busch's struggles, he's still showing some of those positive signs. I don't think it's as bad as it appears on the surface, but we can't be squinting at this and doing the expected WOBA scenario again. We just did this with Morel. My hope is that it's obvious that we see tons of slugging, pulled balls like we're seeing with Dansby Swanson recently. That way I don't have to show these plots. I actually don't like showing plots like this because typically that's a bad sign. So I don't want to show any more plots for Michael Busch and Isaac Paredes.
Okay, then don't.
Well, they're worrying me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hear you. Well, and look, like now we kind of do transition into, and we've been paying attention to it anyway, but we do transition a bit into, okay, like now we got to think of 2025. And, we've been talking so much about like PCA's growth and development, Miguel Amaya's resurgence
They
here
did
in
not
this
have the
second
best week
half and
either, by the
stuff.
way.
Say again?
They did not have the best week either, by the
No.
way. PCA whipped like crazy.
Yeah, and so, that's really where we transition to. We got to kind of look and pay attention to, all right, how do these guys look and what who's locked in where going into the offseason, where if you were going to add offense, where would those positions be available? And there's a lot of, I think, interesting questions to ask about that. You do have a handful of guys that can move different positions. Obviously, the Cody Bellinger situation is one we're going to have to keep an eye on. Who's your DH? Things like that. There is a good amount of questions to be asked here. And I don't think these 3 weeks or 2 weeks, whatever it is, will completely provide the context on that. But that's, you need this time to be productive. We spent so much of the last few years kind of talking about how we wanted to see different things down these stretch runs so that we could get answers going for next year. And so I don't expect them necessarily to write this season off just yet. But You
Do you
do
think if
want this.
Isak turns it around and shows that extreme offense that we see from Dansby, that it changes any of the outlook going into the offseason for third base?
I I don't think so. I think
So
he's your third
if he bats
baseman.
350 with 6 home runs in the last 3 weeks, does that change, you think, how the front office proceeds? You think regardless if he continues to bat 150, he's still locked in?
I would think so. I mean, they traded for him. They traded for him. He has a track record, and I know, even when the trade was made, there was concerns expressed about his profile and things like that, but I can't imagine a couple of bad months post-trade, new organization, new team, etcetera, is gonna change their mind on that unless some very clear and brilliant plan presents
Yeah.
itself at third base.
Yeah, I agree.
Like if there was some obvious free agent that wanted to be in Chicago or something like that, like then maybe it's a different discussion and you're having a conversation of like, okay, we made this trade, but is it working? Like, let's think about this. Could he play somewhere else? Like something like that. But I think absent of that, you have bigger holes to
Yeah,
fill. And
agreed.
I don't think you have that answer at third base. So I can't imagine that a couple of rough months, and rough months they are.
Big
But
time.
yeah. So
Well, the Zips projects him 2024, 2025, 2026. Of course, now we're in 2025, but to provide context, going into the year as a 3.6 WAR player. Next year, still 3.3. 2026, still 3.3. This is summed for production with a 240 batting average in 570 plate appearances with 27 home runs and average defense. So, that seems pretty attainable, just about 240 with like 20, 25 home runs and walking a decent amount and not striking out. So if there's an encouraging sign, I think we're seeing some of the skill set that has potential to translate that in the last 3 weeks from Paredes. And if he continues to show on, then I think it would take an extreme scenario, like you pointed out, for the Cubs to move off him.
yeah. But again, like that is the type of stuff that you're watching for here. I mean, I think as we go forward into next year, there's certain constants, but it is going to be interesting to see how they approach this stuff. It's going to be interesting to see. I was talking with our guy, uh, Cody Delmendo, this afternoon about like how they're going to approach this, and it does, in these past seasons, like I can see the language they would use if they were just going to kind of roll this back and they'd pump up how great PCA looked, the resurgence of some of these guys. We were a little closer to the
Shoda,
playoffs, et cetera, et cetera. Like you
Raj.
can envision reading the letter from Tom Ricketts that kind of tries to explain away
I already
why
know
you're
what it
not
is.
really going to see Juan Soto at Wrigley Field,
We did
right?
not reach our goals, but we are still extremely optimistic with our young talent like PCA,
Yes. We have a
Hodge,
top
etc.
system. PCA
Yeah.
showed that he can be a star if the so I can see it. I don't know what they're going to do. That being said, though, you look at this roster, there's a lot of areas where you can kind of at least start asking some questions. And I think those questions would start. Has Miguel Amaya done enough in this stretch, not necessarily to avoid you addressing the catcher position at all, but how much do you want to address it? How much resources do you want to use, whether that's money or trading players, et cetera, to beef up that position?
And
Or
by the
has,
way, the projections for Amaya will be bad. Don't don't think it's going to be better because he had a 4-week stretch. He
yeah,
will be projected as a below average catcher next season. Now it's up to the front office to calculate how much error is in that projection based on what they saw in person. That will be an art form to interpret that versus the more projections they see on paper.
yeah. So that's one. You look at third base. We just talked about that. It feels like they have their answer, but he is struggling. And
First base.
you're gonna have to kind of ask yourself, like, okay, yeah, you want to allow change of scenery. I'm sure a trade, if I were a professional athlete, a pretty life altering event for you, your family. So I'm sure it's not an easy thing, but all of a sudden he can't play defense. Like the
Yeah.
hitting is not what you wanted it to be. And you're going to have to ask yourself, all right, how comfortable are we that this solves itself, or do we need to address the lineup in other ways? Dansby's going to be your shortstop. So that's one of the areas we don't need to talk about. We can just mark that one off. Looking at him specifically, obviously you needed to see this offensive kind of resurgence from him, and where he's kind of brought his overall numbers back to and things like that. Because, you pointed it out the entire time that like the batted ball data and all that other stuff didn't
What
reflect that
for Bush?
Dansby Swanson,
Oh, okay.
didn't reflect that he was all of a sudden like awful and going to be a 60 WRC plus guy, but you needed to see it a little bit. Like you needed to see him come out of that funk and like really play better. And as we sit here now, he's at a 96 WRC plus.
Within
Like
career range.
it's
That
it's
is
it's
his
career
career
range. He's
minimum.
always, kind of you're expecting him to be slightly above, slightly
Yeah.
below if he has
3
a
years
great.
ago, he was 91 WRC
Yeah.
plus. 3 years ago.
Yeah. So it's a possible thing. Nico at second base. Obviously, there was a lot of chatter about him at this trade deadline or earlier this offseason, stuff like that. And so it's potentially an area you could address.
Then trade Paredes.
Sure, have Nico play third. Nico at a
No,
94 WRC
no.
plus.
I am so not into that idea with
Oh,
Nico
okay.
at
I
third
thought that's
base.
what you were getting
No,
at.
no, no.
Sorry.
I mean,
No, I thought that's what you were getting at.
sorry, I get a little instinctive when it comes to this because
I understand.
it's such a loaded idea, not in a bad way, but it's so difficult to pay for 4 to 5 wins under $15 million
Sure.
for 3
Yeah.
years. And Nico's skill set is the most predictable,
Yeah,
high
I'm not
contact.
advocating for it.
I know, but
yeah.
I know you're not, but I'm advocating this to the world right now. Having the ability to have a high elite level contact, speed, and defense typically never decreases over the course of a pre-30-year-old player. So the Cubs are likely going to get the most wins above replacement at the cheapest price. I'm fine trading everyone on this team. Don't get me wrong. But the likelihood they can replace Nico's value for either the same rate or a cheaper rate is incredibly challenging and extremely unlikely. It's almost not even worth discussing it because then at that point, I wanted to discuss going out and signing Juan Soto and trading for Mike Trout and trading for all these guys because in my mind, that has the same degree of unlikeliness.
Yeah. And just I see our friend Edward in the YouTube chat, Nico at third. No, I'm not advocating for it. Just something you see in the discussion, basically. Like when people are but we don't. I don't want to belabor it. Yeah, Nico 28 steals. He's at a 94 WRC plus now. So again, like pretty close to like career range. Once he was getting regular playing time and starts, he's always been slightly over. And he's still got a few weeks to get himself there.
And
But
you
he's
have to
having a
improve above
3+
those
win
2 guys.
season.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Like
he's a great player. So
you need better players than Nico, of course. You need better
Yeah.
players than Dansby. Okay. You need 7-win players. It's not to say those guys are the answers, but you need better players to complement those.
Yes.
Those players aren't getting you your 7-win players.
Right. And so, then you keep looking around. Michael Busch obviously has had a very nice season, a very nice, rookie season, coming over, finally getting that runway after being traded from the Dodgers. But it has not been his best stretch. And he's had stretches where the numbers are pretty bad under the hood. So overall, it's going to be a really nice season, I think, for him. And you're feeling pretty good about that trade on the early return. But there's still some stuff left to prove and some questions left to answer. And, again, in that area of where can we get power? Where can we slot in a star player if one is available in one form or the other?
Yeah.
Is first base somewhere you look? Is DH somewhere that you look? And then, you move to the outfield, like Ian Happ having another good year, another Ian Happ year. He'll be there. He'll be doing his thing. PCA showing you a lot of really great stuff, but still 23 years old, a lot to prove, a lot of growth and adjusting to be doing. Seiya, really good offensive year, questionable on defense at times. And then does Cody Bellinger decide to stay or not? And that one is tough to get a read on. You look at that Matt Chapman extension that the Giants just rolled out, and it does sort of give you the impression of that. But then when you look at the overall numbers, it feels hard to believe that someone would be that confident to give such a large contract. But if they believe it's out there, he's going to opt out and try to get it. And so, that's kind of the state of the roster. As we get toward the end here, I do have to mention, I mentioned the starting pitching, Brendan, and I forgot to do this earlier. So I do need to, but I'm going to give, we have to do our Illinois Pork Power player of the week. I'm going to give it to all three of them. I'm going to give it to Wicks, Assad, and Jameson Taillon. Jameson Taillon does get the win on Sunday. 6 strong, 6 hits, 1 earned, 1 walk, 6 strikeouts. Nice season for Jameson Taillon. 3.5 ERA. Like he's had a very nice bounce back season, which we'll probably focus on, I think when we're doing like report cards in the offseason or anything like that. But those three provided the power for the Cubs this weekend, presented by Illinois Pork Producers. Savor the flavors, savor the gains, and celebrate any occasion by enjoying the best pork produced by Illinois pig farmers. Had to give it. It is not typically a group award, but not a great weekend for the Cubs.
Okay.
So yeah,
sometimes Pat Hughes and Ron, they give a group award.
The player of the game. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's totally fine.
So I think that's all we have for you. I think we'll wrap up and, let people focus on the Chicago Bears for a little bit. But it was a disappointing week. It was weird. And I saw somebody mention this in the YouTube chat. I apologize. I'm not sure who it was at this point. It was earlier in the show. It was a weird weekend because there was so much focus on Rizzo, and I felt that personally. But it was a consequential week for the team. And so it felt very weird at times. Yes, Tracy K in the YouTube chat. Great to see Rizzo again, but it should have been the sidelight, not the highlight of the weekend. And yeah, it was a weird sort of feeling because it did kind of feel like, okay, got to focus on Rizzo. This is such a huge thing. Also, though, kind of at the same time, they're playing themselves out of the playoffs, like for real this time. And it was hard to kind of like focus on both things. But hey, if you want to hold out that hope until the season's over and they're mathematically eliminated, as Luke always says, we're not going to tell you how to Cub. But when you still have 3 with the Dodgers and 3 with the Phillies, all on the road, you can't lose series at home to the Pittsburgh Pirates. And it's just like, we were talking about this, Brendan, as it was happening. So much of everybody's fandom, and this is true of every team, but like we talk about it so much. I just didn't need more September losses to the Pirates.
And like,
it's just those random, like on which day was it? I don't remember. It was Monday or Tuesday, I think. Jacob Triolo.
It was Monday.
Like, I don't need it, man. You know what I mean? I think Monday was Brian Reynolds, but I think Tuesday was Triolo. Doesn't matter. But it's like you and I talk about all the time. Like, why do I still care so much about Austin Kearns? And it's because I watched him in those stupid Reds in their stupid vests do their best to keep the Cubs out of the playoffs. Why do you
bring up Austin Kearns right now? That was totally unprompted.
No,
I mean, we're talking about Rizzo and all this stuff. I mean, out of nowhere, Austin Kearns.
But it does just remind me of that, where it's like, and again, this was not like the best chance to like make the playoffs or anything, but they got close, and let's see if they can just keep riding this hot streak. And it's like, nah, right away,
whatever, man.
Air out of the balloon. So it is what it is. The rest of the crew, I don't think, well, you would, it's not so bad for you, but I am not jealous of Cody, Luke, and Ryan, as we have 3 9 p.m. Central starts coming up on Monday. This is my time to
shine.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So late nights, but the CHGO Cubs crew will have you covered. And, look, 3 weeks left. We're going to be without baseball relatively soon here. So let's enjoy it. Let's see what happens. Let's hope the guys stay healthy. We see some, continue to see some positive developments from the guys that we want to see those developments from. And, we'll see if they're able to make it mildly interesting again, then great. And if they kind of, this weekend is the one that sort of sends them into fading away, also so be it. So I'm glad we got to cheer for Anthony Rizzo. I wish we could cheer for him more. And I'm disappointed at how the Cubs played this week, but we'll keep an eye on everything as the rest of the season plays out. Again, the rest of the crew will have you covered for these Dodgers games if you want to stay up late with Luke, Cody, and Ryan. Brendan and I will talk to you next Sunday. As always, we appreciate your support. And yeah, we'll talk to you again soon. As always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.